The unexpected breakdown. It was a sunny afternoon when Jack and his stepson, Mike, set out for their road trip. The plan was simple: drive through the scenic countryside, enjoy the peaceful views, and have some bonding time on the open road. Jack had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. He was excited to spend time with Mike, who had recently started showing an interest in outdoor activities, and Jack thought it would be a great way to connect with him. The car hummed steadily along the highway, the gentle sound of the tires on the asphalt setting a relaxing rhythm. Mike had his headphones on, listening to his favorite music while Jack enjoyed the peace and quiet. The journey had been going smoothly and they had already covered a few hours on the road. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. Without warning, the car's engine sputtered, making a strange noise before it came to a complete stop. Jack's hands instinctively gripped the steering wheel tighter. He tried to restart the engine, but it refused to budge. The dashboard lit up with warning lights, none of them offering any answers. Mike looked up from his phone, his face filled with concern. "Dad, what's going on?" Mike asked. His voice tinged with worry. Jack sighed, looking at the dashboard, which was now filled with red warning lights. "Looks like we've got a breakdown," he said, trying to sound calm despite the sudden panic rising inside him. "I'm going to pop the hood and check it out." Jack got out of the car and walked to the front. The engine didn't look like it was on fire or smoking, which was a small relief. He opened the hood and looked inside, seeing nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. He tapped a few wires, checked the belts, and gave the engine a few gentle shakes. Nothing seemed to be wrong, but the car still wouldn't start. He got back in the car and tried again, but the engine just refused to turn over. Jack's frustration was building. He had no idea what was wrong. The last thing he wanted was for their trip to be ruined by something as simple as a broken-down car. After a few more attempts, Jack finally gave up. He turned to Mike and shrugged. "Looks like we're stuck here for a while. I'll try calling for help." There was no cell service. Jack glanced at his phone with disbelief. He had been sure that this area had coverage. He stepped out of the car again and looked around. They were on a long stretch of highway with no other vehicles in sight. The trees lining the road seemed endless, and there were no signs of civilization nearby. The quiet, peaceful surroundings felt almost too quiet. It was a strange sense of isolation that Jack hadn't expected. Mike, now more concerned, turned to his stepfather. "What are we going to do? We can't just sit here. We're not going to get anywhere." Jack had to admit that Mike was right. They needed help and fast, but without a phone signal, there wasn't much they could do. The nearest town was miles away, and walking there in the heat would take hours. Jack scratched his head, trying to think of a solution. "I guess we'll have to walk to the nearest town," Jack said, looking over at Mike. "It's the only choice we've got." Mike nodded, but he didn't look pleased about it. The thought of walking under the hot sun didn't sound fun, especially with no clear idea of how far they had to go. But what else could they do? Sitting in the car waiting for a miracle didn't seem like a good plan. The two of them grabbed some water bottles, locked up the car, and began walking along the side of the highway. The sun beat down on them, and the silence of the rural area was unnerving. No other cars passed by, and it was almost as if the world had completely stopped around them. They walked for what felt like miles, the quiet becoming more and more unsettling. The occasional rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds were the only sounds breaking the stillness. After a while, Jack could feel the weight of the situation settling in. The silence was starting to make him uneasy. They had been walking for over an hour now, and there was still no sign of a town or any people. It was just the two of them and an endless stretch of highway. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around for miles, and that realization made the situation even more unsettling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, rundown building at the edge of a tiny town. The town didn't look like much, with a few old houses and a handful of buildings, but at least there was something. They approached a gas station, hoping to find help or at least a place to call for assistance. As they walked inside, the dim lighting and dusty shelves gave the place an eerie feel. It was almost like stepping into a time capsule. Everything seemed stuck in the past. Behind the counter, an old man looked up as they entered. He smiled, but it was a strange, almost too welcoming smile. "What brings you to here?" he asked, his voice raspy, as if he had been talking to no one for years. "We had a car breakdown on the highway," Jack explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "We were hoping to get some help." The man's smile faded slightly and he gave a long, slow nod. "Car trouble, huh? That's a shame. You're lucky you made it here. This town's not on many maps these days." Jack felt a slight chill as the man's words sank in. Lucky, Jack thought, but the feeling in the pit of his stomach told him something wasn't quite right. The silent hotelist Jack and Mike stepped inside the gas station. The peculiar atmosphere only seemed to intensify. The old man behind the counter glanced at them again, his eyes narrowed but oddly knowing. It wasn't the kind of look Jack was used to, and it made him feel like something was off. Still, they didn't have any other option. Their car wasn't starting, and they were in an unfamiliar place. They needed help. "We're looking for a place to stay for the night," Jack said, trying to shake off the unease creeping up his spine. "Is there a hotel nearby?" The old man nodded slowly, his lips curling into that strange, almost too wide smile. "There's a hotel down the road, quiet place. Not many people pass through here anymore, but it'll do for the night." Mike glanced at Jack, a little unsure. Something about the old man's demeanor felt unsettling. He couldn't quite place it, but there was an odd weight to the silence in the room. The air felt thick, like they were being watched. "Thanks, Jack," said, forcing a smile, and with that, he grabbed Mike's arm and led him out of the gas station. They had no choice but to head to the hotel the old man had mentioned. The road to the hotel town was small, and the road leading to the hotel was narrow, winding through a dense patch of trees. The further they walked, the more isolated it seemed. The buildings were run down, many of them abandoned, and the streetlights flickered on and off. It was as if the town hadn't been touched in years, and that strange feeling crept up on them again. They hadn't seen a single person since they entered the gas station. They finally reached the hotel, and it looked even older than the gas station. The sign hanging above the door was faded and barely readable, and the building itself looked like it had been standing for centuries, its paint chipped and peeling. Jack felt a momentary hesitation, but Mike seemed eager to get inside. Away from the eerie quiet of the outside world, they entered, and the door creaked loudly, as if to announce their arrival. The lobby was dimly lit, with dusty old furniture scattered around. The air inside was stale, and there was a musty smell of old wood and mildew. Behind the front desk sat a woman likely in her mid-50s wearing a plain, old-fashioned dress. She didn't look up as they entered, her hands busy with something on the desk. But when Jack cleared his throat, she slowly raised her head and gave them a small, forced smile. "Checking in?" she asked, her voice distant but polite. "Yeah," Jack replied. "We had some car trouble down the road. We're looking for a place to stay for the night." The woman nodded slowly. "We don't get many travelers these days. The town's quiet. You're welcome to stay. We have rooms available." Mike and Jack exchanged a glance, but there wasn't much choice. They needed to rest, and the night was growing late. Jack nodded. "How much?" "Just $10 for the night," the woman said, her smile never faltering. "You can pay in the morning. You'll be fine here." The price was so low it felt surreal, especially for a hotel that seemed this quiet and rundown. Jack hesitated but shrugged. It was the only place for miles. As they followed the woman to their room, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hallway was eerily silent, not a sound except for the soft shuffle of their feet. The walls were lined with faded paintings and old carpets worn from years of use. The dim lighting in the hallway barely illuminated the way, and it seemed like the hotel was stuck in time, stuck in a past that hadn't moved forward in decades. When they reached their room, the door creaked open with a loud groan, revealing a small, simple space. It was neat, but the atmosphere felt heavy. The bed was covered with a faded floral comforter, and the curtains were drawn shut, blocking any natural light from entering. The room felt like it hadn't been touched in years, but there was something about it that felt oddly comforting. Perhaps it was the fact that they finally had a place to rest for the night. The unexplained sounds. They unpacked their bags and settled in, but Jack still couldn't shake the odd tension in the air. Mike had already plopped down on the bed, flipping through a book he'd packed, but Jack was still pacing around the room. The hotel felt too quiet, too empty. Just as he was about to sit down, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the walls. Jack stopped dead in his tracks, looking toward the door. The footsteps weren't slow or soft. Whoever was walking was moving deliberately, like they were pacing the hallway just outside. "Mike, did you hear that?" Jack whispered, his eyes narrowing. Mike looked up from his book. "Yeah, but it's probably just someone else staying here. It's an old hotel, right?" Jack frowned, but the footsteps didn't stop. They continued for a few more moments before suddenly halting. There was no knock on the door. No one came in. The silence returned, heavier than before. "I don't know about this place," Jack muttered, sitting down on the bed. "It's just weird." Mike laughed lightly, trying to dismiss the tension. "It's fine, Dad. Maybe they're just people walking around or something." Jack wasn't so sure. Something about the hotel, the silence, the odd behavior of the staff, it all felt strange. But tired and frustrated, he leaned back on the bed and closed his eyes, trying to let go of the unease building inside him. The secrets behind the walls. Night wore on in the small, dimly lit hotel room. Jack couldn't seem to shake the strange feeling that had settled over him. Every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the distant thumping footsteps, felt magnified in the oppressive quiet. despite the fatigue of the long walk and the uncertainty of their situation. Sleep didn't come easily. Mike, on the other hand, had already fallen asleep on the bed. The book he'd been reading now resting on his chest, Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering about the strange events unfolding. What was it about this hotel that made everything feel off-kilter? Why did the receptionist and the woman at the front desk act so oddly? And those footsteps, as if someone was pacing just outside their door, what was that all about? Unable to quiet his thoughts, Jack slowly slipped out of bed. He grabbed his jacket and quietly opened the door to the hallway, peering out into the gloom. The dim light from the old sconces cast long, flickering shadows down the narrow hall. For a moment, there was nothing, just the eerie silence that seemed to cling to the place. But then, he heard it again, the same footsteps, but this time closer. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Someone was definitely out there, walking up and down the hallway. He couldn't see them, but he could feel their presence. As though they were moving just out of sight, he stepped cautiously into the hallway, not wanting to disturb Mike. But his curiosity got the better of him. The silence was almost too thick. The kind of silence that felt like it was watching him, listening for his every movement. The footsteps stopped once again, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. Jack didn't know what drove him to it, but he started walking down the hallway, following the sound that seemed to lead him to a door at the far end. The door was old. Its wood chipped and cracked, but it wasn't locked. Without a second thought, Jack turned the knob, slowly pushing the door open. Inside was a small room. There were no windows, and the only source of light was a dusty old lamp that barely illuminated the room. It was a storage area, filled with unused furniture and boxes stacked high. But what caught Jack's eye was the odd, antique mirror hanging on the wall. Unlike the rest of the room, it was clean, its glass smooth and perfectly reflective. As Jack stepped closer to the mirror, he noticed something strange. The reflection didn't match the room he was standing in. The figure in the mirror appeared distorted, as though it was from a different time, a different place. The room in the reflection was brighter, less worn, and there was a large, ornate rug on the floor, a stark contrast to the cluttered storage area behind him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back from the mirror, heart pounding. What was this? Why did the reflection look so different? Was the hotel playing tricks on him? Before he could examine it further, he heard a low voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Jack spun around, his hand reaching for the door handle. Standing at the threshold was the hotel receptionist, his face pale, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," the receptionist repeated, his voice colder now, almost warning. "The hotel has a way of trapping people." Jack's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling despite himself. The receptionist didn't respond immediately. He glanced toward the mirror and then back at Jack. There was something in his eyes, something almost sad. "The hotel is alive," the receptionist said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "It feeds on the souls of those who stay too long. It traps them, keeps them here for eternity." Jack's mind spun with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "This doesn't make any sense." The receptionist shook his head. "It's been happening for years. People come, they stay the night, and they never leave. Their spirits wander the halls, stuck in time, waiting for someone to set them free. You're already part of it now." Jack's heart raced, and the room seemed to close in around him. He grabbed the doorknob, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The air was thick now, like the hotel was alive, breathing in time with his quickened pulse. It wasn't just the mirror, it was everything. The walls seemed to press in on him, and the floor felt like it was shifting beneath his feet. "Let me out," Jack shouted, but the receptionist remained motionless, his face expressionless, almost resigned. The hotel seemed to hum with energy, and Jack felt a cold, creeping sensation running down his spine. The footsteps began again, this time louder and more frantic. They were everywhere, echoing in the hall, in the walls, in his mind. "You have to leave," the receptionist said again, his voice a whisper. "Before it's too late." But it was already too late. Jack felt himself losing his grip on reality. The hotel had already started to claim him, and there was nothing he could do to escape its grasp. The endless hallways. Jack stumbled back from the receptionist, his mind reeling from the chilling words. "The hotel is alive, traps souls." He couldn't process it. It felt as though the world around him was warping, the air growing heavier with each passing second. His breath came faster, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, drowning out everything else, but he couldn't move. The door wouldn't open, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the persistent, creaking footsteps that now seemed to be everywhere. "I need to get out of here," Jack whispered to himself, panic creeping into his voice. He turned back toward the door, his hands gripping the cold brass handle with all his strength. But the door refused to budge. The receptionist's face remained unchanged, and Jack realized that the man wasn't there to help. He was just another part of the Hotel's strange web. Please, just let me go, Jack pleaded, his voice cracking with the desperation of someone who had no other options. But the receptionist only shook his head, his eyes now reflecting something far darker. You can't leave, no one leaves. Not once you've been marked by the hotel. Jack's pulse quickened, his fingers still trying to twist the door handle. His panic intensified as the room seemed to shift around him. The walls, once solid and unyielding, now appeared to breathe in rhythm with the faint sounds of footsteps which were growing louder. Closer, the hotel was changing. Without warning, the floor beneath Jack's feet shifted, the room around him seemed to stretch impossibly long, and the hallway outside stretched out in endless curves, like an infinite loop. It was no longer the hotel he had entered, this was something else entirely, a labyrinth, alive and twisting in ways that defied logic. Mike, Jack yelled, turning toward the back of the hotel, where his stepson was still in the room. Mike, we need to go now. But as Jack rushed toward the room, he found that the hallway had lengthened. What was once a short distance was now impossibly far, and the walls seemed to move, closing in on him, distorting the space. The hotel wasn't just alive, it was shifting, trapping him in a never-ending maze. With every step, the hallway lengthened. It felt as though the hotel itself was alive, its very structure shifting, feeding off his fear. Frantic, Jack reached the room, but when he opened the door, he was stunned. It wasn't the room he had left just moments ago, it was different. The furniture was arranged in odd, unsettling patterns, and the once comfortable bed now looked old, worn, and uninviting. Mike was no longer there, and the bed was empty. Mike? Jack called out, his voice trembling with both fear and confusion. Where are you? A soft, almost inaudible whisper echoed through the room. Help me. The voice sounded like Mike's, but distorted, as though it was coming from somewhere far away, somewhere deep within the walls. Jack's heart raced. Was Mike trapped in the hotel too? Was he part of the illusion, lost in the endless maze of the hotel's shifting halls? Panic seized Jack's chest as he ran back into the hallway, calling out for Mike. The hallway stretched before him, now seemingly endless, and the walls whispered back, their voices indistinguishable from the sounds of the hotel itself. The footsteps were no longer faint, they were thundering, pounding, growing louder with every second. The walls vibrated with an energy that felt alive, as if the hotel itself was waking up. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls, and Jack felt a chill seep through him. His breath became shallow as his surroundings warped and twisted. He could no longer tell where he had come from or where he was going. It was as though the hotel had become a living nightmare, its shifting corridors trapping him in an endless loop. Mike, where are you? Jack screamed, but the only answer he got was a soft, mocking laugh that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jack was trapped. He knew it now. The hotel wasn't just a strange place, it was a prison designed to trap its guests, feeding off their fear and confusion, growing stronger with each soul it claimed. The unraveling. As Jack wandered the never-ending hallways, his mind began to unravel. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each step, the floor now slick and cold beneath his feet. The whispers that had once been distant now felt too close. He was being watched. The very hotel itself seemed to be alive, its pulse matching the racing beat of his heart. He stumbled into a room, but it wasn't a room at all. It was a reflection, a mirror of the space he had just left. The walls, the bed, everything was exactly the same, as though the hotel had trapped him in a cycle. And in the mirror, he saw not just his own reflection but Mike's face, pale and ghostly, staring back at him. No, Jack gasped. Mike. Suddenly, the mirror distorted, and Mike's face morphed into something unrecognizable, a twisted, tortured expression that made Jack's blood run cold. The face was pleading for help. But it wasn't Mike anymore. It was the hotel's way of showing Jack what he had become, a prisoner trapped in its endless grasp. A wave of realization hit Jack. He was no longer just a guest in the hotel. He had become part of its trap, just like all the others before him. The hotel didn't need to kill its victims, it simply trapped them, stole their essence, and used it to feed its own twisted existence. No one left, no one escaped. As the mirror cracked, splitting the world around him into 1,000 pieces, Jack screamed for Mike once more. But in the distance, he saw nothing, only endless, shifting corridors. The endless hunt. Jack stumbled backward, his hands outstretched as the crack in the mirror widened, revealing a twisted reflection of the hallway that stretched endlessly. The familiar surroundings were now unrecognizable, warped, distorted, as if the very fabric of space was bending. Around him, the reflection wasn't just a mirror. It was a portal, showing a reality that was slowly consuming him, pulling him deeper into the nightmare of the hotel's hold. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Jack felt a shiver run through his spine. His breath was visible, fogging in the air. The hotel was colder than it had ever been, and the walls around him seemed to close in, Shifting like the jaws of a trap, his mind raced, desperate to find a way out. But he was no longer sure if escape was even possible. Every time he moved forward, the hallway seemed to stretch further, and every time he looked back, the mirror had multiplied, reflecting his every step, making it impossible to discern which direction to take. "Mike," Jack cried out again, his voice hoarse with fear. "Where are you?" There was no answer, but the echo of his voice bounced off the walls, reverberating in a way that sounded wrong, off-key. Twisted, it was as if the hotel itself was mocking him. He turned around quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was no sign of his stepson. Panic began to set in, not just from being trapped in this endless maze, but from the overwhelming feeling that he was being hunted. It was subtle at first, like a creeping shadow at the edge of his vision, then, as if on cue, the footsteps returned. Louder this time. They weren't the quiet, unsettling sounds of before. These were heavy, deliberate steps, pacing behind him. Jack spun round again, his pulse quickening. But when he looked, the hallway was empty. His mind raced. Was it a person? Was someone following him? Or was it something else, something darker? Something the hotel had conjured from his fear. The air grew thicker, and the strange whispers returned. They were low at first, inaudible, but then they grew louder, clearer. They were no longer just whispers, they were voices, speaking in a language Jack couldn't understand, but somehow he felt he knew what they meant. They were calling to him, beckoning him to follow, stay away from it. Jack muttered to himself, gripping his arms tightly to keep his mind from spiraling. Stay away from the voices. It's just the hotel trying to break you. But the voices wouldn't stop. They continued, growing more insistent. They were now clearly speaking his name. Jack, 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 and he could feel the walls closing in around him, drawing him deeper into the web of the hotel. He tried to move forward, but his legs felt heavy, like he was walking through thick mud. The hotel was dragging him down, its power pulling at him like gravity, and it was suffocating. Suddenly, the hallway split into two. To the left was a darkened passageway, and to the right, a dim light flickered weakly as if offering a way out. Jack didn't know which path to take. Both felt like traps, but then he heard it again. The faint sound of footsteps, too close now, coming from the left. It was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving toward him. Without thinking, Jack ran toward the light. He pushed himself, his legs aching, as the darkness behind him seemed to follow like a creeping shadow. The whispers grew louder, the footsteps matching his pace, and soon, Jack could hear ragged breathing, as if someone was chasing him. Just behind him, his fear spiked, his chest tightened. The sensation of being hunted, of being stalked by an unseen force, was overwhelming. He didn't know if it was real, but his instincts screamed at him to run. The flickering light ahead grew brighter, and Jack's pace quickened. He could see the door now, just a few feet away, a door that promised freedom and exit. Something to break the cycle. He reached out for the handle, but as soon as his hand touched it, the ground beneath him gave way. His feet slipped out from under him, and he fell, tumbling into the darkness below. The fall into the void. Jack landed hard on the cold floor, the impact knocking the breath out of him. He gasped, struggling to push himself up, but as he looked around, he realized he wasn't in a hallway anymore. The space he had fallen into was vast, stretching out in every direction. It was a cavernous room, the walls lined with ancient, weathered stone that seemed to hum with energy. The air was heavy with a musty, oppressive scent, and the room was dimly lit by flickering torches mounted on the walls. For a moment, Jack was disoriented, trying to regain his bearings. He pushed himself to his feet and looked around, his heart still racing from the fall. But the room wasn't empty. There, standing at the far end, was a figure, a tall, shadowy form cloaked in darkness. Jack couldn't make out any details, but he knew it was watching him. It felt like a presence, not just an entity. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice shaky but forceful. The figure didn't move, but the shadows around it seemed to twist and shift, forming shapes that were too familiar, too disturbing. He could almost see faces in the shifting shadows, faces that looked like those of lost guests, trapped in the hotel for eternity. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions frozen in a silent scream. It was like the room itself had become a prison for souls, their spirits forever bound to this place. Jack's breath quickened as the shadows closed in around him. The hotel had changed once more, and now he was deeper in its grip than ever. Whatever was watching him in the dark had no intention of letting him go. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. He wasn't just trapped in the hotel anymore. He was in a place outside of time, a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. The hotel had pulled him into its heart, and escaping was no longer just a matter of finding the right door. The shadows gathered tighter, pulling him toward the figure at the center of the room. The whispers returned, this time louder than before. They spoke of a long-forgotten past, of guests who had come and never left, Their spirits were bound just as Jack's would be if he couldn't find a way to break free. As the figure began to step forward, Jack realized the hotel was more than just a building. It was alive and it was hungry.